I want you to note, Pete, episode 184.
Not bad.
Bang.
Tell you what, we keep on cranking, and there's a lot of news coming out that we can't even figure out how the heck to release it, but it's happening, John, and it's going to be happening very rapidly, so we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, a lot of good news about the Rebels Edge, folks, and hopefully a lot of good news for all of you, because the more Rebels Edge, the better.
That's true.
This show, known as the Rebels Edge, Jared is the man who puts up all the magic on the screen, other than Pete's handsome face.
Yeah.
Jared puts up all the other stuff, dancing bears, bulls, runs the clock, puts up all those topics and so forth on the right side. And we welcome you. Anybody new to the show? Well, welcome and tell a friend. Yeah. Let's get started, Pete, with the Macro Minute, which is all the time that macro ever gets. Today, I'm going to say, Pete, it's these REITs that they definitely found a bid. Any real estate investment trust or anything related to commercial real estate, CRE, is getting a pretty big boost today. And I'm going to say that's part of the Macro Minute.
I'm going to give you defaults, bankruptcies, and all the crap that's going on behind the scenes too, John, which, by the way, we have doubled in this same time frame those numbers from last year. And by the way, this is the highest region globally for this kind of a thing that's going on with these defaults and bankruptcies. And that's pretty macro, and that's what I'm giving you.
Just a minute. All right. Now, how about fantastic futures?
Fantastic futures.
Yep.
Giddy up. Fantastic futures today, Pete. Mine's going to be markets are really taking a look at the implications of the aborted mutiny, if you want to call it that, or coup. I don't think it was either, but I do think that the gentleman who perpetrated it, who leads the Wagner group, is lucky to still be breathing because he basically was marching on Moscow. And wow, what a crazy thing over the weekend. Can you imagine if futures were trading on Saturday, Pete?
Yeah.
Which they were not. They were not. But if they were, those S&P futures would have rocked to the downside and then upside and then as flat as they are today. How about you?
Absolutely amazing. Probably one of the more interesting news stories in a long, long time, I would say, John, because this is just something that's fairly unprecedented. By the way, I'm going to hit you real quick with cryptocurrencies. In Q1, it's been a record year now for the numbers that they're looking at right now over there at the CME, John. $3 billion worth of volume trading in the crypto space. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of just how strong that is. And oh, by the way, crypto's been on a really, really nice run. Not today. It's actually pulled back a little bit, but ran all the way up over 31,000 on Friday, which actually put it for the first time over that 31,000 level in well over a year.
It was a nice run, and it gave some of that back, of course, but it's a combination of, some people say, you know, the uncertainty, the more uncertainty there is in the world generally, except for the risk off day, the better cryptos do, because they sort of follow along the lines of the yen, the VIX, and gold.
Yep.
Given that this so-called coup ended up to be a big nothing burger, that's why I think they gave up a lot of that. All right, Pete, let's take a look at one of the more interesting things in a long time, Lucid. It was up about 15%, then 14% and so forth. It's bled all the way down. Just moments ago, Pete, I looked at it. It was only up 5.5%. What was the news? They're doing a deal with Aston Martin, which is its own separate company. It trades on the London. And this is a really interesting one, Pete, because they're going to do a deal where they give some stock over to Lucid to help them with the EV space, and they're going to make a luxury EV supercar, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty cool. Lucid's already looked very cool, but now getting together with Aston Martin probably means the interiors are going to be a lot cooler too.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, John. And by the way, you know, as everybody has been going over to the EV space, from Mercedes to Audi, you name it, everybody seems to be there. Not Aston Martin. They haven't done it yet. So because of that, this is going to be a big deal for Lucid. They went to what they considered to be the biggest and baddest, which I thought was a little bit of a slap to Tesla, right? Some of the technology and all the rest of it. But in any case, I saw a Lucid just the other day that absolutely was beautiful going down the road. It looked a heck of a lot like a Tesla. But boy, I'll tell you, I've seen the trucks, I've seen this, I've seen that, I've seen whatever they've put out there, but it's pretty interesting, and what a beautiful looking car. But this is a big deal, I think, for Lucid. But this reaction is very, very interesting, John. To your point, you're up 14, 15%, and then the next thing you know, you're pretty much giving most of it back. Gosh, I'm not sure exactly how to think of that, other than the fact that maybe at some point in the not too distant future, maybe Lucid gets Aston Martin given a little knock. Maybe it's the whole deal. Who knows? But they love the technology and the batteries that they've got.
Yeah, and this is like you say, Pete. I think inarguably it's a more elegant vehicle than the Teslas right now.
Yeah.
But the Teslas obviously have millions more hours in them, and a lot of that data extremely valuable. We've talked about that. Also, the idea that a lot of people do complain about the fix and finish of the interior of those Teslas, Pete.
Yeah.
They love the way it drives, and they love to be in a silent vehicle like a Tesla that's not putting out any emissions. But I think the Lucids look a little cooler. They look more like a supercar.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how this plays out. This is just announced, but they're going to issue about 28 million shares to raise a bunch of money to do this. How about Carnival Cruise Line, Pete? CCL. Before the market opened, they were a little to the downside. Once the market opened, they dropped. They reported a loss of over $400 million in their fiscal second quarter, and that appears to be the primary driver here.
Well, I would say it's a combination of a lot of things, John, because you and I look at these things really, really deep too. But so they beat on the earnings. They're still negative, but they beat on the earnings. They lost 31. They were looking for a loss of 35. They beat on the revenue, record revenue. They beat on just about every metric you can imagine. But I think part of the problem here has been that the stock was running into this before these earnings. And so because of that huge run that the stock had made, I think it makes a little bit of sense that this gets a little bit of a maybe even a little early pop, maybe, but then it sort of started to sell off just a little bit. I think given that, it makes a lot of sense. They did do a lot of different things on the call, talking about just what the bookings really look like, the deposits as well, John. All these things say to me that people are coming back in a big way, and it's not over just yet. But obviously, you've got to convert this all into money that you're making as opposed to money you're burning. And that's always going to be one of the issues that people look at. Still has a big short interest. Those shorts that hung in there, they better start thinking about whether or not they want to buy some of that back, though, John, because these numbers, I think, were pretty good generally across the board.
Yeah, and to Pete's point, folks, if you haven't traded this one, and knock on wood, my head, we have, and it's been all to the upside, but all of those calls really have expired. It was $9 back in the 24th of May or so. So for it to run this far and get all the way up over 16 from under 9, that is a heck of a run. And it exploded a lot of the calls that we were trading, quite frankly. So to see it give back, I would agree with Pete's assessment. And the heaviest volume day, Pete, was the 12th of June. And I'm going to say right around the $13 level, whether you want to be really cautious and say just under 13 or 13, it's only $1 lower than where it is now. That's the area that I would be looking to perhaps get back in. But right now, no position in this one. It's been a great run to the upside, though, to Pete's point.
And John, real quick, I'll just say this. The stock went in 1 month from 11 to 16. So picture that. Add the zero. I always love doing that. But so it went from 110 to 160. All right, that looks like a big monstrous move. Well, it went from 11 to 16. It's the same move. So this pullback today towards 14, I'm not as worried about that, and it does make sense.
What about this one, Pete? Mercury, MRCY. These guys, the stock was falling apart at the end of last week because they were already looking for bids. You know, they're in the aerospace and basically high tech and aerospace go together. These guys, the CEO had to resign last Friday. They named an interim CEO, and a new CFO is coming in the coming weeks. But oh my gosh, the board is still saying strategic alternatives, which means at this point, after the big drop last week and another drop today, they're probably looking at selling the whole thing, Pete.
Yeah, you know what? It's just amazing they weren't able to find anybody, John. And apparently it's
Yeah.
partly to the environment that we were talking about up there when we were talking about the macro side of things. I think that is part of what we're really seeing playing out right now. Stock was somewhere between 30 or call it 28 to 65 for a 52 week. It's 31s now. So stock's been getting hammered. The CEO walks away. Nobody seems to want to buy them. They can't find a buyer. There's a lot of problems going on right now, but somebody likely is going to end up with a pretty good deal, John, for holding out for this rocking of the boat that we're seeing right now with this stock as it's absolutely plummeting.
Yeah, it's a lot of volume here too. So obviously shareholders voting with their feet in terms of getting out of this one. I imagine some, perhaps even Pete, activist investors might get involved, but who knows when and where. So I'm right with you. I'm not saying it's a don't touch. I'm just saying somebody, like you said, is probably going to get a deal when they break this thing up and sell it out, maybe even in pieces. All right, let's talk for one more, Pete. Let's cover VNO, which is Vornado Realty Trust. We started off top of the show with, hey, we're seeing these REITs do really well. Why are they doing so well? Because SL Green sold nearly a 50% stake, or about as close as you can get, 49.9% stake in their 245 Park Avenue space, which is obviously prime real estate in New York. And this is the first really big trade to cross in CRE, commercial real estate, Pete, since interest rates have been jumping up. So a lot of those companies in the real estate space really got a boost out of this. Boston Properties, all these different REITs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they're all just real on for the ride now because they finally had this moment. And I think that is very important because obviously the atmosphere has not been very good for this type of thing. And now all of a sudden you get a good number like this. I think Vornado's got a nice move to the upside for sure at this point in time. There's plenty of room if there is some consistency to this, if we still see a little bit more. I think when you look across the board, whether it's Boston Properties or whomever you want to look at, there are a lot of different folks out there that are reacting to this, a lot of different companies that are having a really nice move to the upside today. Can that be sustained? That's what I think is going to be the critical part of this whole thing. We know what those balance sheets look like. They're a little bit difficult. We also know oftentimes about how some of those yields can look. So there's a lot of attractiveness to some of these in the sectors, but I think right now, John, I think they're getting a nice ride on what's been happening. And of course, the storyline that you laid out there not too long ago.
All right. Well, one of our favorite parts of the show, Pete, where you get to showcase your knowledge, not just on finance, but on sports. Pete has a sports talk radio show, folks, every Sunday from 10 until noon Central Time. Of course, 11 till 1 East Coast time. And it's called the Sports Huddle. I believe it's still called the Sports Huddle, right, Pete?
It is. It is. Yep. We have a lot of Dave Schwartz does a fantastic job. He's a local guy from one of the different broadcast companies, does a great job. And it's a lot of fun, John. We cover a lot of things. We didn't have to do it this week because with all the storms up north, the Detroit decided to move the game up to 10 a.m. actually, just so they could get the game in yesterday. But so we're in the same station as Minnesota Twins. All right, so we're going to hit the USFL. Now, John, you and I were talking right before we came on here, and I was talking about the XFL with The Rock. The problem, I think, with the XFL and the reason why it really trails the USFL has far better viewership. Well, why is that? Because they're not trying to do a bunch of gimmicks. They're not pulling a bunch of crap out there. They got a spring league, and they've got a bunch of very talented guys because, as I know all too well, there is a lot of guys that get to the NFL, but if they're at the wrong team, they're going to get cut. And then eventually maybe they bounce somewhere else. Maybe they don't. So this is an opportunity for those guys to be able to shine a little bit, right? And that's really what they're doing in the USFL. They're given the opportunity to play great football and stick with basically NFL rules for the most part. But I'll tell you what, John, there's some really good football. My wife and I sat down yesterday. We started to watch. We watched 3 full quarters. It became a bit of a blowout. Birmingham was unbelievable. They got this quarterback, Alex Magoo. He was outstanding, probably the best player in the league this year. It's like 66% as far as his accuracy throwing the football. Did a great job. I think he had 20-plus touchdowns going into the playoffs. They're going to be next week against the Maulers, which is Pittsburgh. But I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun, and their ratings just absolutely dwarf what we've seen out of the XFL, and it just shows you that there is an appetite for it. I didn't know that there would be or not, John, in the spring anymore, but there is an appetite. People were watching. They had some really, really tremendous numbers. They got the championship, like I say, next week. But what a great opportunity for a lot of these players to be able to show what they can do. Running backs, wide receivers, some quarterbacks. I think there's some really good offensive linemen as well. Defensive side's tough. I looked over there, John. These guys can't tackle. But the problem is they don't work on tackling, very much like the NFL, which is, part of the thing that goes with it. You don't want to get guys hurt, but then they start to lose the ability to tackle the right way. And so you see a lot of busted plays because of the fact that nobody can tackle in the NFL either. So it's very similar, but what a great game last night. Have you had a chance to watch any of this? And if so, what do you think?
I think Alex, that quarterback that Pete's talking about, folks, is phenomenal. And that kid will be playing in the NFL. Now, it's not like he was brand new, that they didn't know about him, Pete. I forget who drafted him, if it was Seattle or who it was, but they drafted him semi-late in 2018. He wasn't, obviously, because none of us really knew the name until this USFL season. But, he's been a journeyman. 2018 isn't that long ago, really. I mean, so that puts him, 5 years in the rearview mirror from the draft. But obviously, this kid really can play football. The game yesterday was amazing. He has a coach that has a lineage that goes back to my brother Pete, because Skip Holtz is the Birmingham Stallions coach, Pete.
I love him, man. I love him. That guy used to be my ball boy, John, when I played at the University of Minnesota. That's how old I am. I'm standing there looking at the guy, and I'm like, holy smokes, man, Sweet Lou's kid. And he's been around a long time. He's coached a lot of different universities in his lifetime and having the opportunity in the USFL. It's great watching the relationship between he and the quarterback.
Yeah, and he really, Pete, said that this is an exceptional quarterback. Mm-hmm. And most people that have seen any of the either league, XFL or USFL, would agree that this might be one of the best players on the field. Mm-hmm. He's not the only guy that's going to get a real shot at the NFL, but I guarantee you, Pete, San Francisco would have loved to have this guy playing like this. They might have made the Super Bowl this year, but unfortunately, the guy, Mr. Irrelevant, that they had playing quarterback, Purdy, got hurt, and they had nobody. Yeah. Literally nobody. They had to put a wide receiver in at quarterback. Yeah. But this guy is good. There will be other guys. I mean, I think 2020, Pete, 2021, something like that. He got a 2-year deal with the Texans, but with the rosters the way they are, you don't get to stay on the team for very long, especially as the league accelerates that pay. All of a sudden, you're holding on to a guy it's his 3rd, 4th, 5th year in the league. Yeah. He doesn't play for the minimum anymore. He's not getting, the $600,000 that you can sign some of these other guys for. You have to pay him by rule a lot more than that. So anyway, I thought that was one of the real reasons the Birmingham Stallions are in that playoff game now, Pete. And I'd say they're odds-on favorites to win it.
I would think so too. Well, next we're going to jump, John, to the Philadelphia Eagles. Can they get any better? And the answer is, I don't know how. I mean, I know we all know the Super Bowl at Kansas City or whatever, and there were some plays at the end of the game that might have changed things a little bit. But Philadelphia, they are loaded up, and they had a huge draft again this year. But how about this kid, Devin Allen, John? So I'm thumbing through a bunch of stuff, and I come across this kid. unbelievable track star at Oregon and football player at Oregon. He played 3 years, University of Oregon, but he's been out a while. He's 28 years old. Well, why is that relevant? Well, he's 6'1", 190 pounds. He's the backup receiver to Devontae Smith. And how about this, John? The guy is running track and running the 110-meter high hurdles on the weekends as just something to do while he's playing football for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, we've talked about guys before, Bo Jackson and, Prime Time and some of these guys doing different sports. But the thing about this that makes it amazing is, when you get hit a little bit here and there, you're hurt a little bit, that's going to affect you to some degree. Not this kid. The kid's got the third fastest time in the history of the world in the 110-meter high hurdles. He ran a 12.85 this past year. So just think about that. Now, I know most people don't know about that. I actually used to run the high hurdles. I know exactly what these numbers look like. And I can tell you this kid is on fire. He did run a 4.3540 at the combine in Oregon when they came by to see what he looked like. 6'1", 190 pounds, runs a 4.35. There's a good reason why this kid is given an opportunity to be a wide receiver in the NFL at 28 years old, and he's going to do his very best. Practice squad, I believe, last year. We'll see how he does this year. But with that kind of speed and that kind of talent, John, this guy, he's still training for the Worlds. And by the way, the Worlds are in August. What else is in August? Training camp. So he's going to have to make some choices and work it out with the coach on how they're going to do that. If he's at a level where they think he's going to make the team, it's going to be pretty interesting if they allow him to do it, because why wouldn't you though, right? I mean, I don't know. If you were the coach, if I'm the coach, and it's pretty settled that he's at least a good backup receiver, I don't know, John. I'd love to see the kid get the opportunity to run against the best in the world and see where he measures up right now.
Well, and Pete's point here, folks, about the championships this year, it's, I guess, going to be in Budapest. I know they like saying it like that, Pete. Pest.
Yeah.
Budapest for the World Championships. And, as you said, third best time ever last year. He's got the fourth fastest time in the world this year. Obviously, the kid is the best that we've got. So, there are, I'm sure, other kids that are right there with him, but especially for a 28-year-old to be running at this speed, Pete, as long as the coach gives him the okay, I'm sure he'll be there at the Worlds representing the United States. On the other hand, if the coach tells him, you know what, you really need to be in camp, I just got to say it, you got to be in camp, I think he'll pick the camp. Yeah. Because as great as he is in track, and it would be wonderful to win a gold medal at the Worlds, and he's certainly in position to do that. There's no guarantees. He'd make some money on the pro track circuit, because they do, pro track is still a big deal in Europe where you can make some money, but it's nothing compared to what he could make. And what a difference maker on the field for Philly. I mean, if you could put him out there on any given spot, there aren't a hell of a lot of D-backs in the league that could run with that kid.
And he's 190 pounds, so it's not like he's a skinflint. He's not 160 pounds like many of the receivers they've got. A lot of little guys from Alabama that can go. They got one or two bigger guys too, Brown and some of the others. But I'll tell you what, John, Philadelphia, I mean, can they get any more stacked with talent? Whether they got Georgia and Alabama all figured out. They got Georgia guys on defense, Alabama guys on offense. Now they go out to Oregon and grab this kid. I mean, holy smokes, this is a pretty special team they put together up in Philly. They might make a pretty deep run again this year, maybe right back to the big game.
Yeah, and to Pete's point, folks, yeah, we all knew about Ronaldo Nehemiah, great hurdler, lousy football player.
Yeah.
San Francisco put him on the field a few times, but yeah, he wasn't a big threat, especially if somebody laid a lick on him. But this kid at 190 pounds and played 3 years out there in Oregon, this is not like a sideline for him. Like you find some high jumper and you say, God, we could just throw the ball up to him and let somebody try to take it away. No, this is a guy that's played football at the highest level because Oregon's about as good as it gets. They might not win the national title, but they're right up there. Many of the years that he's there, they were certainly super competitive.
Yeah.
And that's a great player. And I'd love to see him do both, Pete. I'd love to see him in the Worlds, and I'd love to see him in training camp, and then as perhaps even if not a backup, maybe even a starter on the other side.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, folks. We always appreciate it. We hope you will share the Rebel Edge with your friends, and we'll have a lot of good news to share with you in the near future. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern.